Commander Lee Minho stood in the cold underground bunker, his breath forming small clouds in the recycled air. The thick concrete walls around him felt like a tomb, but they were the only thing keeping the remaining humans alive. Above ground, the world had become a nightmare of twisted metal and ash. He walked slowly to the reinforced window that looked out over what used to be Seoul, the city where he had grown up, where he had met his wife, where his children had taken their first steps. Now it was nothing but ruins and alien structures that gleamed like dark crystals against the red sky. 3 years ago, the Kelthari had come from the stars without warning. Their ships had appeared in Earth's sky, like black clouds, blocking out the sun. Within hours, major cities across the planet were burning. Within weeks, 3 billion people were dead. The aliens had weapons that could melt entire city blocks in seconds, and shields that made their ships nearly impossible to destroy. Minho touched the glass with his fingertips, feeling the vibrations from the alien machinery working somewhere. Above, the Kelthari controlled most of Asia and Europe now. Their tall, crystal towers grew like cancer from the ruins of human civilization, sucking resources from the earth and sending them to ships that waited in orbit. "Sir," came a voice behind him. Lieutenant Kim Soyang approached carefully, her military boots echoing in the empty corridor. She looked tired, like everyone else in the bunker. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights and too much fear. "Dr. Park Ji-won wants to see you immediately. She says it's urgent." Minho turned away from the window. He had been expecting this call. For months, Dr. Park had been working on something in the deepest levels of the bunker. Something so secret that even he, as commander of the Terran Defense Coalition, only knew pieces of it. The project had a code name that made his skin crawl every time he heard it: Project Baiko, the White Tiger Protocol. The briefing room was dimly lit, filled with the soft glow of holographic displays. Dr. Park stood at the center, her white lab coat spotless despite the chaos above ground. She was a small woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see through everything. Around the table sat the remaining military leaders of Earth's defense forces. General Choi Hoon-woo sat with his arms crossed, his weathered face showing the strain of 3 years of losing battles. Colonel Kim Dae-ho stared at the holographic images floating in the air, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. These were the men and women who had watched their world burn while being powerless to stop it. Dr. Park touched a control, and the displays changed to show brain scans, genetic sequences, and psychological profiles. The images were beautiful in a terrifying way, like looking at the blueprint of a weapon designed by nature itself. "The Kelthari made a mistake," Dr. Park began, her voice calm and scientific. "They studied our technology very carefully. They learned about our military tactics and our political systems. They even studied our culture and our languages. But they missed something important. They never looked at what we really are underneath all of this civilization." She gestured to the genetic displays. "Modern humans have spent thousands of years building societies, laws, and moral codes. We created rules about how to treat each other, how to solve conflicts without violence, how to live together peacefully. But all of these things are just layers we put on top of our true nature." General Choi leaned forward in his chair. "What are you suggesting, Doctor? That we throw away everything that makes us human just to fight these aliens?" Dr. Park shook her head slowly. "Not throw away. Remember, before we built cities, before we had governments, before we had laws, humans were something else. We were the most successful predators this planet has ever produced. We hunted creatures 10 times our size. We survived ice ages, plagues, and natural disasters that killed everything else. We didn't do this by being kind or civilized." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air recycling system. Minho felt something cold move through his chest as he began to understand what Dr. Park was really talking about. "Our ancestors," she continued, had abilities that we have spent centuries learning to suppress. Enhanced pattern recognition that could track prey across vast distances. Intuitive understanding of group psychology that made them perfect pack hunters. Pain tolerance and stress response that allowed them to function in situations that would break modern humans. Colonel Kim spoke up, his voice hoarse. Those traits still exist in us. They exist in our genetic code, yes. Modern society has taught us to ignore them, to suppress them, to be ashamed of them, but they are still there, waiting. Dr. Park's eyes seemed to glow in the holographic light. The Kelthari think they are fighting the same species they encountered 3 years ago. They are wrong. What they destroyed was human civilization. But underneath that civilization, the real human animal is still alive. And it is very, very angry. Minho felt his hands clench into fists, without him realizing it. What exactly are you proposing, Doctor? Dr. Park smiled, and for the first time since the invasion began, it was not a sad smile. I am proposing that we show the Kelthari what humans were like before we decided to be civilized. I am proposing that we unleash the monsters. The room looked like a hospital, but it felt like something much more dangerous. Captain Jung Taeyong lay on the white medical bed, dozens of thin wires attached to his head and chest. The machines around him beeped softly, measuring his heartbeat, his brain activity, and things that normal doctors had never needed to measure before. Dr. Park stood beside a wall of monitors, watching numbers that danced across the screens like living things. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls, adjusting chemicals that flowed through tubes into Taeyong's bloodstream. Behind the thick glass window, Commander Lee Minho and several other officers watched in silence. This is not science fiction, Dr. Park said quietly, not taking her eyes off the monitors. Everything we are doing here is based on real human genetics. The chemicals I am giving him will wake up parts of his DNA that have been sleeping for thousands of years. We are not making him into something new. We are making him into something very, very old. Taeyong had volunteered for this experiment because he had nothing left to lose. The Kelthari had destroyed his hometown during the first week of the invasion. His wife and 2 young children had been in the school that the aliens had targeted with their energy weapons. When the rescue teams found the building, there was nothing left but melted concrete and ash. For 3 years, he had fought the aliens with normal weapons and normal tactics. He had watched his fellow soldiers die in battles they could never win. The Kelthari were too strong, too fast, and too advanced. But now Dr. Park was offering him something different. She was offering him a chance to become the kind of enemy that the aliens had never faced before. The chemical mixture flowing into his veins felt cold at first, then burning hot. His heart rate spiked on the monitors, making the machines beep faster and louder. Dr. Park's fingers flew over the controls, adjusting the flow to keep his body from going into shock. The process was dangerous, she had warned him. Some of the earlier test subjects had not survived, but Taeyong felt something changing inside him that was worth any risk. It started in his brain, like electricity running through circuits that had been dark for his entire life. Then it spread through his muscles, his bones, his blood. Ancient genetic switches were flipping on, one by one, awakening capabilities that modern humans had forgotten they possessed. His vision became sharper first. The dim lights in the medical room suddenly seemed as bright as the sun. He could see dust particles floating in the air, could count the individual threads in Dr. Park's lab coat. Then his hearing changed. He could hear conversations taking place 3 rooms away, could hear the heartbeats of everyone watching him through the glass. But the most dramatic change was in his mind. Information that his brain had always ignored was suddenly flooding his consciousness. He could smell the fear sweat from the observation room, could sense the exact emotional state of every person around him. His brain was processing threats and opportunities at a speed that felt almost supernatural. When the chemicals finished flowing and Dr. Park began disconnecting the wires, Taeyong opened his eyes. The world looked completely different now. Not just clearer, but more meaningful. He could see patterns in everything around him, could predict how people would move before they moved, could sense weaknesses and strengths that had been invisible before. "How do you feel?" Dr. Park asked, studying his face carefully. Tae-young sat up slowly, testing his new senses. "Different," he said, and his voice sounded different too, calmer, but with an edge that made everyone in the room take a step back. "I can smell the Kelthari prisoners in the detention level. They are afraid, but they do not know why yet." Dr. Park nodded, making notes on her tablet. "The enhanced senses are working perfectly. What about your cognitive processing?" Tae-young looked around the room, and his transformed brain automatically calculated 17 different ways he could kill everyone present if he needed to. The thoughts came naturally, without effort or emotion. They were simply facts, like knowing that water was wet or that fire was hot. "I understand now," he said quietly. "This is what we were before we built cities. This is what we were when we hunted mammoths and fought cave bears with nothing but sharp sticks." Over the following weeks, more volunteers underwent the transformation. Sergeant Han Minji emerged from her session with the ability to read environmental patterns like a book. She could look at broken twigs and disturbed earth and know exactly how many enemies had passed through an area, when they had been there, and where they were going. Corporal Lee Jae-won developed an almost supernatural understanding of psychology. He could predict how enemy groups would react to different situations, could design psychological warfare tactics that would break their morale before the first shot was fired. The transformation process was transmitted through encrypted communications to resistance cells around the world. In hidden bunkers and secret facilities, humans who had lost everything to the alien invasion volunteered to undergo the same metamorphosis. They were preparing to show the Kelthari something that no alien species had ever seen before: what humans looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized and remembered what they really were underneath all the laws and moral codes. The galaxy was about to meet the apex predator of Earth, and it would never be the same again. Commander Veld stared at the reports on his desk with 4 eyes that had seen many wars across the galaxy. His tall, insect-like body was perfectly still as he read the numbers that made no sense. In the past 6 months, his forces had lost more soldiers than in the previous 2 years combined, but these were not normal battle losses. The Kelthari were an ancient race that had conquered dozens of worlds. They understood warfare in all its forms. They knew about ambushes, sabotage, and guerrilla tactics. But what was happening on Earth was something completely different, something that made even experienced commanders like Velthar feel a cold fear in their multi-chambered hearts. "Scout Team 7 has missed their check-in," reported his aide, a younger Kelthari, whose green shell still showed the bright colors of inexperience. "That makes 15 teams this month." Velthar's mandibles clicked together, a sound his species made when deeply troubled. "Show me the security footage from their last known position." The holographic display showed the interior of a human building that the Kelthari had converted into a patrol station. The footage was clear and detailed, showing empty corridors and sealed rooms. At 14:30 local time, 6 fully armed Kelthari soldiers were visible on the cameras, conducting their normal patrol routine. At 14:31, the corridors were empty. The doors remained sealed. The security systems showed no breaches, but the soldiers had simply vanished. "Perhaps the humans have developed new stealth technology," the aide suggested, his voice betraying his own uncertainty. Velthar's 4 eyes focused on different parts of the display, analyzing every detail. "Technology leaves evidence," he said slowly. "Energy signatures, electromagnetic disturbances, heat patterns. This shows none of those things. This is something else entirely." 300 kilometers away, in the ruins of what had once been the city of Busan, Captain Jung Taeyong crouched in the shadows of a collapsed building. His transformed senses could detect the Kelthari patrol long before normal human eyes could see them. He could smell their alien scent on the wind, could hear the soft whir of their powered armor, could feel the electromagnetic signatures of their weapons like a taste in his mouth. Behind him, 5 other transformed humans waited in perfect silence. They did not need to communicate with words or hand signals. Something deeper connected them now, an instinctive understanding that allowed them to coordinate their actions without any external communication. It was as if they shared a single mind that had been shaped by millions of years of hunting in packs. The Kelthari patrol consisted of 4 soldiers in their advanced combat suits. The suits were nearly indestructible, powered by energy cells that could run for weeks. The weapons they carried could cut through steel like paper. In a direct fight, the humans would have no chance. But the transformed humans had no intention of fighting directly. Young watched as the aliens moved through the rubble-filled street, their sensors sweeping for human life signs. What they did not know was that the transformed humans had learned to control their body temperature and electromagnetic output. To the alien sensors, they appeared to be nothing more than background noise. The hunt began with silence and patience. The humans followed the patrol for 3 hours, learning their patterns, their habits, their weaknesses. They discovered that the Kelthari relied too heavily on their technology and not enough on their natural senses. They found the exact timing of the aliens' communication checks with their base. Most importantly, they learned that these particular Kelthari had a psychological weakness. They became nervous when separated from their group. When the attack came, it was swift and surgical. The humans did not use weapons that would show up on sensors. Instead, they used the environment itself as a weapon, causing a controlled collapse that separated the aliens from each other without triggering their distress beacons. In the confusion that followed, the Kelthari found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. By the time the patrol's next communication check was due, there was nothing left to find except empty armor and equipment. The humans had vanished back into the ruins, leaving no trace of their presence except the growing fear in the minds of their enemies across the globe. Similar scenes were playing out in the underground command center beneath Mount Jiri. Dr. Park watched tactical displays that showed patterns of activity that should have been impossible. Transformed humans in Australia were coordinating perfectly with others in Europe and Africa, despite having no communication equipment. The Kelthari are pulling back from isolated positions, reported Lieutenant Colonel Park Sao Jin from the Australian theater. Her voice carried a satisfaction that had been absent from military reports for 3 years. They are abandoning small outposts and consolidating into larger, more defensible positions. Commander Lee Minho nodded as he studied the global tactical situation. Fear is spreading through their ranks. They are beginning to understand that they are no longer the predators in this war. The transformation was expanding beyond military personnel. Civilian survivors who had lost everything to the invasion were volunteering for the process in increasing numbers. They emerged as perfect instruments of asymmetric warfare, each one capable of operating alone but somehow maintaining coordination with others of their kind across vast distances. The Kelthari had come to Earth expecting to face a civilized species with predictable military tactics. Instead, they were discovering what humans looked like when civilization was stripped away and only the hunter remained. Commander Veltor stood in his command center aboard the orbital station, surrounded by holographic displays that told a story he did not want to believe. The reports came from every sector of Earth, from every outpost his forces had established. Something had changed in the humans, something that made his experienced military mind struggle to find explanations. The security footage from Outpost Zeta 7 played for the 5th time, showing the same impossible sequence of events. At midnight, 43 Kelthari soldiers were at their posts, conducting normal operations. The base's automated systems were functioning perfectly. The energy shields were active, and the motion sensors showed no intruders. At 12:47 a.m., the corridors were empty. Every single soldier had vanished without triggering a single alarm. "Sir," called his communications officer from across the bridge, her voice tight with worry. "We are receiving a transmission from the human resistance. It is being broadcast on all frequencies, simultaneously." Velthar turned his 4 eyes toward the main display as the image resolved into the face of a human male. Commander Lee Minho appeared in the hologram, but something about him made Velthar's ancient instincts scream warnings. The human's eyes had changed. They held a focus that seemed to pierce through the transmission itself, looking directly into Velthar's mind with an intensity that made the alien commander's shell prickle with fear. "Commander Velthar," Minho began, and his voice carried something that Velthar had never heard from a human before. It was calm, controlled, but underneath lay a predatory undertone that triggered responses deep in the Kelthari's primitive brain. "Your empire made a fundamental mistake when you invaded our world." Velthar found himself taking an involuntary step backward, his body reacting to threats that his logical mind could not identify. The human continued speaking, but it was not the same species that the Kelthari had been fighting for 3 years. This was something else. Something that wore a human face, but carried the essence of something far more dangerous. "You studied our cities, our governments, our military structures," Minho said, his head tilting slightly in a gesture that reminded Velthar uncomfortably of the way apex predators sized up their prey. "You assumed that what you observed was what we truly were. But civilization, Commander, is a choice. It is something we built on top of our real nature, not something that replaced it." The transmission continued, and Velthar found himself unable to look away, despite every instinct telling him to flee. "The humans you encountered 3 years ago were our species choosing to be civilized. We had laws, moral codes, and social structures that kept our true nature contained. But you destroyed those structures when you killed 3 billion of us. What you face now are humans who have stopped choosing to be civilized." Deep in the bunker beneath Mount Jiri, Dr. Park monitored global communications while studying brain scan data that showed patterns she had never seen before in human subjects. The transformed individuals were processing information at speeds that should have been impossible for organic brains. Neural pathways that had been dormant for thousands of years were now blazing with activity, creating networks that resembled nothing in any medical textbook. "The coordination between separate groups continues to exceed our projections," she reported to Commander Minho when the transmission ended. "Subjects in different continents are acting with perfect synchronization, despite having no technological means of communication. It is as if they are accessing some form of collective intelligence that existed before language, before civilization." The evidence was overwhelming. In Europe, Captain Yunhound reported that Kelthari forces were abandoning their forward positions and retreating to heavily fortified compounds. "They are no longer conducting offensive operations," she said, her voice carrying the same predatory undertone that had infected all the transformed humans. "They are purely defensive now, trying to survive until reinforcements arrive." But Velthar knew that reinforcements would not be enough. The reports from his field commanders described encounters with humans who seemed to anticipate every tactical decision before it was made. Supply convoys were being intercepted not through intelligence gathering, but through what appeared to be instinctive prediction of Kelthari behavior patterns. The most disturbing reports came from psychological warfare specialists, who described humans using tactics that seemed designed to exploit specific weaknesses in Kelthari psychology that the aliens themselves had not known they possessed. It was as if the humans had studied his species for generations, learning every fear, every instinctual response, every way to break their minds before their bodies. "Sir," his aide reported, "High Command is requesting a full strategic assessment. They want to know if we should begin evacuation procedures." Velthar looked at the tactical displays showing Kelthari positions shrinking across the globe like An infection being fought off by a healthy immune system. Send a message to the fleet, he said quietly. Tell them that we are no longer fighting the same species that we invaded. The humans have become something else, something that views us not as enemies to be defeated, but as prey to be eliminated. The transformation had spread far beyond the military. Civilian survivors were undergoing the metamorphosis in hidden facilities around the world, emerging as perfect predators, capable of independent operation while maintaining mysterious coordination with others of their kind. The Kelthari had awakened something that had slept for millennia, and now it was hunting them with the patience and skill of a species that had earned its place at the top of Earth's food chain through millions of years of evolution. The war had become a hunt, and the Kelthari were no longer the hunters. The final battle for Earth began not with explosions or massive armies, but with silence. Commander Lee Minho stood in the command center, his eyes now carrying the same predatory focus that marked all the transformed humans. The change in him was subtle but unmistakable. His movements were more fluid, his awareness seemed to extend beyond normal human limits, and when he spoke, there was an undertone that made even his own officers feel like they were in the presence of something that had once been human, but was now something more dangerous. Begin the final phase, he said quietly, and his words were transmitted through encrypted channels to transformed humans across the globe. What followed was not a conventional military assault. The Kelthari had prepared for that, had fortified their positions, and gathered their most powerful weapons. Instead, they faced something that their military doctrine had never anticipated, a coordinated hunt conducted by an entire species that had remembered what it meant to be the apex predator. In the ruins of Tokyo, Captain Jung Taeyong led his unit through the Kelthari stronghold without firing a single shot. The aliens' advanced sensors could not detect the transformed humans who moved like ghosts through their own territory. Instead of attacking directly, the humans systematically dismantled the aliens' psychological defenses. They began by eliminating the Kelthari's sense of security. Communication lines were severed in ways that made it seem like equipment failure. Supply deliveries were delayed just enough to create anxiety. Patrol routes were subtly altered by environmental changes that forced the aliens into patterns that made them more vulnerable and isolated. The Kelthari soldiers found themselves jumping at shadows, unable to sleep, constantly looking over their shoulders for enemies they could not see but could somehow sense watching them. Their advanced technology became useless against an enemy that attacked their minds before touching their bodies. Commander Velthar watched his forces disintegrate from within his orbital command ship. Reports flooded in from every sector, describing the same impossible phenomenon. His soldiers were abandoning their posts, not from cowardice, but from a terror so deep that it overrode their military training. They spoke of feeling hunted by something that understood them better than they understood themselves. "Sir," his communications officer reported, her voice shaking with fear that had spread like a virus through the entire fleet. "Base Commander, Zekron is requesting immediate evacuation. He says his troops are experiencing complete psychological breakdown." Velthor activated the communication link to see the base commander's face on the holographic display. Zekron had been a veteran of 12 planetary conquests, a warrior whose courage was legendary among the Kelthari. Now his eyes showed the hollow stare of someone who had seen something that shattered his understanding of reality. "Commander," Zekron whispered, "they are not fighting us. They are hunting us. My soldiers report feeling watched constantly, but the sensors show nothing. They hear sounds that make no sense, smell scents that trigger panic responses we did not know we had. This is not warfare. This is predation." Across the planet, the pattern repeated itself. Kelthari outposts that had stood for 3 years were abandoned within hours, as alien soldiers fled in terror from an enemy they could not see or understand. The humans had learned to exploit every weakness in Kelthari psychology, using their own evolutionary advantages against them in ways that were both brilliant and terrifying. Dr. Park observed the global situation from her laboratory, watching displays that showed the systematic collapse of alien resistance without a single major battle. The transformed subjects are coordinating at levels that exceed our most optimistic projections, she reported to Commander Minho. They are implementing strategies that appear to emerge from collective instinct rather than centralized planning. The final phase came when the last Kelthari strongholds found themselves completely isolated. Their supply ships refused to land, their reinforcements turned back toward space, and their communication with the fleet became increasingly desperate. The aliens who had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves facing something they had never encountered, a species that hunted not just with weapons, but with an understanding of fear itself. Commander Velthareth's final transmission to the Kelthari homeworld was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in the fleet would hear his words. "We have made a terrible mistake," he said, his 4 eyes showing the defeat of a warrior who had finally met something stronger than himself. "The humans we invaded were not their true form. They were a civilized version of something much more dangerous. When we threatened them with extinction, they stopped choosing to be civilized and remembered what they really were." He paused, looking directly into the camera, with the expression of someone delivering a warning that could save his entire species. "The Empire must never return to this system. What we awakened on this world is not just a military force. It is the apex predator of this planet, and we have taught it to see us as prey. They are no longer bound by the moral codes that once limited them. They have become something that exists only to hunt, and they are very, very good at it." The evacuation began immediately. Kelthari ships fled Earth's atmosphere in chaotic retreat, leaving behind 3 years of fortifications and conquered territory. But their escape only marked the beginning of a new phase in the war. From hidden shipyards around Earth, vessels began launching that carried the transformed survivors toward Kelthari space. The galaxy was about to discover why Earth's dominant species had chosen to limit itself for so long, and what happened when those limits were permanently removed in the depths of space. The monsters that had once called themselves human began their hunt among the stars.